I think talking to Jessie, like, again, reminds me of, yeah, this experience that happens to so many designers, but uh, I feel she has a particular skill set to endure of like being around so many engineers, scientists, people that have really particular ideas a lot of the time about what being smart looks like. And her willingness to like risk that perception in pursuit of like the best solution and the best attempts and the most like exploration. When she's talking about the things that she was willing to try, it is a really smart approach and it works better than things that were happening in the room prior to her trying it out. And I still think that, yeah, I still think it's common for designers to like let imposter syndrome or something like that about being a creative dampen that ability to like keep pushing and show up in spaces that are not all other designers. So I really respected that about her.
It's wild to me to think about how long NASA was operating without design thinking and without doing, some of the fast, low fidelity prototyping that is so ubiquitous to our discipline.
Mm-hmm.
That some of those things will take so much time to suss out and to verify. You might as well try to eliminate options that are dead ends as early as possible because the costs are so high and the stakes are so high with some of, especially the aerospace missions.
Totally. I wonder how much their culture has shifted in general, like by embracing more and more design thinking or just like maybe open-minded like approach. I am really curious if the projects have seen a big shift in, I don't know what qualities, like creativity or sort of like novel ideas, or yeah, if there have been any changes in like the technical accuracy of them, or yeah.
To me, it was another story how valuable US designers are and their skills as like design thinking and to how many different industries it can be applied. And that if you are really interested in something and you would like to work for a certain industry, you can go ahead and make yourself useful there and create the career you want for yourself. You might be interested in space, you might not be a scientist, but guess what? There still might be a place for you. You just have to go and pursue it. And it's amazing what track your career may take if you really follow what your passions are, instead of like standing with a portfolio waiting for someone to hire you for the position that or for the role that have been there for the last 50 years.
Yeah, that is really taking control of your own destiny. When you have a role that is offered to you that isn't the full gamut of your skills, but you bring them anyway and you prove to them that it's useful.
Yeah, and like most of our guests, proving it just by sheer like love of the thing, like just continuing to show up every day and be like, man, I just want to do this at a 10 again for me. It's really, really cool.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond Ray. Today we're meeting with Jessie Kawata. She's currently a director of design for sustainability at Microsoft, but she started her career at NASA. You might be surprised, yes, there is industrial design and design in general out there. And Jessie is also an alumni of Art Center. She will tell us how do you graduate from the illustration and design and end up looking at space and starts with a whole bunch of scientists at the space agency. Jessie, how about that? And what else do you want to tell us about yourself?
Thank you, Margaret. I'm so happy to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you all. Yeah, so my name is Jessie Kawata. As Margaret mentioned, currently I am the Director of Sustainability for Design at Microsoft. And I've been in this role for only a few months. It is a first type of charter at Microsoft. So that's really exciting. But I've been at Microsoft for about 6 years, having many different mini careers there, from AI to working in education to working in privacy and security on edge. And then, as Margaret mentioned previously, was at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California for 6 years, where I really kicked off my career as the second full-time designer at NASA at large, and was able to really build up design thinking there, as well as spearhead the first industrial design team.
So I had been reading a previous interview that you had done where you talked about a childhood interest in science, and like what was really making you curious about science and space? What got you into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember exactly what I said out in the ethers of the article, but I can recollect that, I've always just been really interested in science as a kid, and particularly in environmental science and marine biology. I don't know if you guys took this test, but in elementary school, at least in America, you take this career test, right? And it's like either you could do this or you could do that. And I remember getting art and science. And of course, I was better at drawing and illustrating and, using paint. So it wasn't even in my like realm of thinking that I would, go into science or be a scientist. But yeah, my fascination for the environment was pretty young. I remember also going to in 7th grade. That was a pivotal moment where I went to science camp, and I think it was mainly about space. But then I think a few months later in 7th grade, I did a career project on being an illustrator, and this is when I started doing user research for real. And I went to Art Center College of Design, and I spoke to a few illustrators. I went back to their house. They showed me all their paints and all their studios, and I was super excited. And I think it just was those two things merging together at the same time, where it was like, maybe I don't have to do either or. And then I remember this one time in high school during environmental AP, and I'm okay at writing essays, but I'm not the best. I'm not the best at like technical essays. So I remember watercoloring all of my homework. Most of my homework, I submitted an essay, but also a page of a watercolored biogeochemical cycle.
Oh my gosh.
The teacher sending back like whatever grade. I think I got okay grades, like plus, 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 plus. At least I got these, couple pluses at the end of it, which I don't know how much it amounted to. But so I think it was really just trying, like loving art, loving science, but also understanding and knowing that I can communicate my passion for science and my understanding of science through visualization, through illustration and graphics. And then space was just a part of it because, growing up, like, of course you're interested in space, but you never, as an artist or as a creative, never even could imagine working at a place like NASA. So that wasn't even in my purview at the moment.
I love that you had a teacher that could even accept, like drawings as part of your essay work. That's cool that they were encouraging.
I can relate to this a little bit, despite it wasn't about writing essays and illustration wasn't an extra. It was a physics test in middle school, and I did not understand questions, did not know how to answer them at all. But what I did very good illustrations illustrating the question of like there's a human in the elevator is going with this speed, and like what's the target, what's the speed of the target moving inside, something like that. I had no idea, but I illustrated all the questions. Did not get plus, plus, plus. It was just take text, test one more time, and make sure your friend tutors you.
I didn't expect all these flashbacks to K through 12 school.
Yeah. But that seems like how relevant it is. I mean, Jessie's like, of course, you're young and you're interested in space, and like continued on. And I'm like, I don't know if that's actually a given. I mean, space is cool. I think lots of people are sort of go to a planetarium. Maybe they're like, this was a fun day at the museum, but it seems like it really has been like a deeper love for you for a long time.
Yeah. I have to admit, and this is off the cuff. No. Growing up, I wasn't a huge fan of NASA, only because I wasn't really aware of the depth of things that NASA did growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. But it was, of course, about space, I think, driven by the understanding that like the sun, the environment, right? Climate change, there's the sun powers, biogeochemical cycle. It was like the relationship of space to living on Earth that I started to really understand at a young age. And I think that was maybe my fascination with exploring more about, outer space and interplanetary space, and like, how do we actually get this data? How do we actually find that out? But yeah, I wasn't like a kid that grew up with NASA shirts and a shuttle, and now I have all of that. But growing up, I didn't.
Did you look into the stars and the sky, or were you like always more focused on how the space affects the Earth and what we have here and the biological cycles?
I was always a bit of space, stars and space as well. I mean, I think it's that mystery and that curiosity that just drove a lot of my passion of like, what is that? Let's find that out. And the mystery of it all, but also like the interconnection with spirit and culture. I've always been into history as well. And, the idea that the stars were inherently connected to Native American folklore, to Japanese folklore throughout time, that mystery, that storytelling, that whimsical, spiritual, ancestral wisdom and truth has always been something that I've been interested in since I was little.
Mm. Yeah, I like the way you're talking about space as this intersection of like very technical scientific application and also holding a lot of intrigue for us and a lot of like creative space. When did you start being able to see yourself applying your creative thinking to that realm in general? Not necessarily NASA yet, but this like area.
At Art Center, I was an eco-geek. I don't know what else to call myself, but I was president of Eco Council, which is a student organization for sustainability at Art Center. And through working with other students and faculty and teachers and driving that, as well as other people helped to lead us, in addition, that really helped me to understand a bigger picture of why this should be a priority in design. It was just a duh concept for me. It was like, of course, we need to do this. And, in the early 2000s, design for sustainability was a thing already, but it was more technical, I think, and driven by compliance and policy and supply chain, and the idea of design for sustainability in connection with innovation and in connection with design thinking didn't really exist. So that also intrigued me. And then from my leading Eco Council, met a lot of product and industrial designers because I did go into Art Center with illustration, the major. Met a lot of product and ID students, also studied abroad at INSEAD, at the Business School of the World in France, and then immediately switched to product design major because I knew that if I ever wanted to apply sustainability, understanding how to be a product designer, understanding industrial design was key. But then utilizing my storytelling skills in illustration, right, and visual skills that I learned in illustration to process that type of thinking. And that was kind of how I managed going to school and kind of being in the middle of two majors. Was sort of sustainability was at the heart of that.
Is visual communication still a really crucial part of your industrial design process? Because I think some people are more or less motivated by sketching or visual, elements of the thinking process, but it sounds like that might be kind of pivotal for you.
Absolutely. I think at first, and I'm sure we can go into this later, but I've always been back and forth between figuring out the value of, and the difference, honestly, between art and design. I think that's a huge conversation, right, in the industry. That's been a huge conversation in my own mind as well, because at JPL, at NASA, I was always trying to separate the two because I was trying to build value in technical industrial design, system strategy design, right? And sometimes the idea of art and the idea of subjective illustration or subjective graphic design or ephemeral experiences and installations didn't really help to justify design in terms of strategy and industrial design, right? So that I've always sort of been in this like middle space, but also this divide. But what was really interesting was that the relationships that I was able to have and build and secure at NASA JPL, which I think allowed me to be as successful as I was, chartering design thinking and industrial design, was through the window of visual design, was through the window of illustration, because that was almost the handshake, if you will, Like, let me help you to figure out and visualize what you're actually thinking, right? And they're like, oh, aha, I see how I wasn't able to communicate this. And then through that, then I was able to say, hey, well, we can do more. Design can actually, has more capabilities than just visual design. And I think how that carried over to other parts of my career was that we began to see visualization as what I used to call contextual objects. We can say models, right? We can say Venn diagrams, we could say mapping, we can say mind maps, we can say quad charts, if you will, right? Like this type of modeling, at least from an engineering and scientific point of view, they do diagrams and they have indicators, but not from a place where it's actually something that is helping them think through their thinking. It's more of an output, right? So it's always been really, really helpful in my career.
So it sounds like you've always kind of been drawn to some leadership, whether it was at Art Center and pioneering some design thinking at NASA. Can you talk a little bit more about taking up that kind of mantle and like how you're driven to do that and like functionally what you're doing and maybe from a mindset perspective, like what's going through your head? I don't know, is it as seamless and easy as you make it look?
Oh, goodness. I wish it was. It's absolutely, the journey is climbing a mountain, and we've all heard the phrase, culture eats business for breakfast. Is that what it is?
Oh, I think so.
About breakfast. I don't know. It might be that I'm hungry. No, it's absolutely a mountain. And I don't, I think in my career, right, there is this pattern of just beginning new things, creating my own role, creating new types of cultures and ways of working. And that isn't on purpose, to be honest. It's, I think that when there's a gap and there's an opportunity, and I think a lot of opportunities that have been presented to me, I always knew I could do more. And I always knew that what I could bring to the table was more than what was offered. So it's almost just been like a natural path for me. And I don't know if I'm addicted to that hardship. I don't know if I'm addicted to climbing that mountain. I don't love climbing mountains at all. But, if someone doesn't do it, who's going to do it? And I think that motivation of knowing that something can have bigger impact is what has really been driving my career and my purpose in all of this, paving new roads and paving new opportunities for others to follow too, right? And asking those hard questions that others might not be able to ask. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of anxiety, but I am so convicted in making this planet a better place. So, someone's got to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you walk into the place that haven't seen a designer before, or maybe saw one designer before. How do you introduce it to that group of people who have never worked with design before?
I'm trying to remember my first day at NASA JPL, and I remember walking in and I felt so alien-like, I felt so misunderstood because I actually got hired in as a graphic designer. And I only took one graphic design class, to be honest, at Art Center. So I was like, I don't know if I can even do this job. NASA didn't have out of the box design that wasn't traditional to an institution, an in-house design consultancy, if you will, that could work on things from product design to industrial design to UX, all the other types of design under the umbrella. That didn't exist yet. So why I got pulled in, I think my first project was to create the smallest, tiniest sculpture. It literally was like an inch. And this tiny sculpture was meant to go into the hallway of the director of the solar system at JPL. He needed an inspirational portal, if you will, to bring politicians, to bring administrators, to bring government policymakers through, and influence. And there was this project that I had to take all of the solar system missions and translate them into something that can be, for lack of a better word, on a wall. So in this case, I was really brought on to exercise the muscles that I wasn't necessarily used to, maybe used to going back prior to industrial design, but wasn't used to in terms of graphics, in terms of interior design, in terms of spatial design, in terms of sculpture. Like that was all new to me, but that was the window to creating more types of design at JPL. That was the handshake. It was, hey, come help me storytell. Come help me figure out how to connect back to users, to people, to humanity, and make our missions more meaningful. So that was, I think, one of the biggest reasons why I got brought on, but also because I had both majors. I was sort of, writing that line of product and illustration. So in case we had a different type of project, or the director of Mars came along and he wanted something else, I could also do that as well.
Did somebody, in your opinion, really have an understanding that what they were asking you to make was a deeply like user-driven project? Like, did they understand it already from a designer standpoint, where you're like thinking a lot about the experience of somebody in that space? Or were they more like, we need something that is attractive, because you were talking about it, I think, with more design depth. And I'm just curious if you were excited about the project because you already heard that, or if it's like you showed up with that and you started shifting the way that they were thinking about it.
Yeah, from my understanding, I think the ask was to create a lobby design, create something for a hallway. Different ways you can do that, really, how you can approach that, right? You can approach that from like just painting a wall, putting a sign up, to create an actual experience that people can engage with as they move along and work strategy into it. And that's how I sort of approached it. That first project was creating an experience and creating an engaging experience that justified the reason why the director of the solar system had to bring down politicians through this hallway, right? Like I kind of came through it from, what's your need? Why are you doing this? What is the end result? Let me do some research on the missions. Like I really approached it with design thinking. And I think that's why I sort of approached it the way that I did and what it came out to be. It was a long hallway of like many different types of sculptures, but I think that the tiniest Voyager spacecraft sculpture was probably my most favorite thing to do. I can't do it now because my eyes are really bad, but it felt like a little watchmaker at the time.
So Jessie, it sounds like it started with you bringing this like user experience and understanding what's the story that NASA wants to tell to the people who come in. But later on, you moved to like building your team and actually coming up with mission proposals that had impact on what's going on here on Earth, and doing some more scientific / design projects. Tell us more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So after a few years of starting at JPL and really creating those relationships with scientists and engineers, helping them to translate their mission, helping them to connect the mission purpose to humanity, if you will, I felt the need to move forward with embedding more product design and industrial design into the bread and butter of what JPL does, which is creating interplanetary proposals for missions. That's essentially their product. And the department that really made that happen was called the Innovation Foundry, where systems engineers work with mechanical engineers and scientists of all different planets and biogeochemical cycles would come together and brainstorm early mission concepts. Scientists might have an idea or a science question to answer, right? Is there life on Mars? ? Right? But an engineer might say, hey, I have this blank technology. And then folks would come together and say, okay, now what can we actually do? So it was an early sort of brainstorming department that then took a concept and kind of matured it through the process, where it became a more fleshed out proposal and eventually, presented to politicians and secured as an actual mission. So there was that department at NASA JPL, and my team, called the studio at that time, did have relations with that department. But I knew that that was the best place to kind of insert design thinking, but I didn't know how to do it. So I've asked the team that brought folks together if I could just sit in the back and observe. And of course, the assumption was that I would just draw, pictures. And honestly, that's what I did. I got whiteboards, was in the corner of the room, and this room was called left field, which I could talk about later. And I just started drawing, but honestly drawing because I couldn't understand most of what they were saying. And so I was trying to understand this new language and piecing things together. And eventually the leaders in that department saw what I was doing and saw that it was very useful to understand and problem solve at this rapid pace that they were trying to problem solve within. And so eventually I got brought on as an official member of that team. And my department that I created was called Creative Strategy. And what that team was we leveraged early prototyping material. We leveraged desktop 3D printing. We had toilet paper rolls. We had styrofoam balls. We had pipe cleaners. We had contextual objects, as sort of what I talked about before. We had sticky notes. We had all the things that you might need as a good recipe for design thinking. And what I realized was you can have the environment to design thinking. You have the wall-to-wall whiteboards, right? But doesn't mean you're actually using it in a functional and effective way to solve problems. So that's when I brought in more of a practice, more of a type of ethos and thinking. And through that type of more strategic systems thinking, I was able to form other relationships and a lot more opportunities opened up, working on the Mars helicopter, on the early concept of operations, right? A lot of the work that they do at an early concept phase is really in the computer, in an Excel spreadsheet, but being able to take their thinking and start to map out what the maneuvers and journey might be on Mars, like literally do that on Mars, like just print out Mars and let's just draw on Mars, not rocket science. Turned out to be rocket science, right?
The kind of rocket science.
Yeah. But really just using, right, the practice of like general design thinking to have them solve these problems and fast, or just using, now we know styrofoam balls are not sustainable, but I'm just going to say it because we did use styrofoam balls.
Yeah.
But right, takes two styrofoam balls to say, here's Mars, here's Earth. Okay, the orbit of a spacecraft is going to maneuver like this, and just hold those two things up in front of a group and communicate that way versus spending 2 hours, 3 hours in a computer visualizing that out. Like it was that sort of low fidelity prototyping mock-up culture that we had as industrial designers, and bringing that in to brainstorms as well as the systems thinking. And yeah, like I said, eventually opened up opportunities like creating mock-ups and prototypes for the Europa lander, working on Venus robotics, and really just working with mechanical engineers to play, to demonstrate high level capabilities, ideas, using converge and diverge type thinking, not just designing in a wine glass sort of shape. And then also connecting back to user need. Why would people care about this? When we were designing for Earth science missions, when Earth scientists would come into this mission formulation brainstorm, a lot of it was based off of studying and getting big data on certain things such as carbon sinks, such as evapotranspiration, et cetera. But as we start to build a story around why it's so important to the world, to humanity, we need to understand who's on the ground, right, in these areas that are most affected by extreme weather, most affected by hurricanes, translating it in a way that politicians might understand, because politicians aren't scientists. It became this idea that we're not just using design thinking, we're also using human-centered design and user research to really bring this back down to something that people can understand.
So you were a little bit doing what we usually see in the space movies, like in The Martian, when they were showing how the shuttle will be traveling around Mars, and when Sean Bean says the line, "One not just simply land on Mars," when they were trying to rescue Matt Damon.
It's probably not as glamorous as that.
No, I think they were actually filming you in your day-to-day life, Jessie, and they were like, okay, this is our inspiration, and now we have to go make this into Hollywood.
No, but this is like so this is so basic, and people like forget about it because like when you are a big Mr. Scientist with a real important job, and you might sit there and you may not know how to solve imagine something or solve something. Like we know it as a designer. Sometimes all you have to do is like take one styrofoam globe here, one there, and just literally visualize something in the simplest possible way instead of showing charts and Excels and simulations. Because it's like it's how we perceive things as humans. It's much more effective to like take a globus and make a model of a sun and like circle one around another to explain how the season change. It's like my dad is explaining to my mother every time she doesn't understand something. Than trying to show like a 3D simulation when everything happens and you still just can't put those two things together in your visual imagination if you're not a very highly visual person.
Yeah, and for the record, like the scientists and engineers, right? They were trying their best on these whiteboards, right? They were modeling, they did go into the computer and draw. I think with design, though, we're able to map out contextually. We're able to do it in a way that might be more effective or might have a specific, interesting scenario a part of it. Like I think we, as designers and as artists and creators, have a different way and a different skill set, right, to visualize. And I think that's kind of where the beauty came in, that we could do it faster, potentially better, and collaborate with them at the same time.
Yeah, I think like to rephrase what you just said, and maybe what I was trying to say, it's like to remind people that there is no shame in making things or doing things in the like simplest kindergarten level way, because like with less you can just achieve much more.
Yeah, and for less cost. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really great. I feel like, we're all human and susceptible to fitting in. So like once you started getting traction that people would participate in this type of thinking with you, I can definitely see that it grew and sort of snowballed into something very effective. But I guess I'm curious, just in your mindset and the way you tackle things day to day when you're in an environment that feels very other than like the way that you naturally would approach something or think. Like, how do you ground yourself in your approach, or how do you feel supported and like confident enough to stay curious and stay like willing to try the kindergarten level approach to something, like try the thing that might make people laugh at you and like hope and believe that instead they'll learn to play and they'll participate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not easy because at times at NASA JPL, people did find it childish. People did express that it was something that they didn't want to participate in. They didn't feel comfortable with it. So in parallel, I think my hope was, going back to what Margaret was expressing too, my hope was to talk about how we're all artists, we're all creators. And this is just part of the process. It's no different than sketching on a whiteboard, taking out a pipe cleaner or sticking some Legos together, right? It's also connecting it to the business, connecting it to time, right? And resources and money as well. For example, there was this team called Team XC in the same department. And Team XC was the same team, but we worked on CubeSats, and CubeSats are like little satellites, they almost like 30 centimeters long. It's almost like just stackable cubes together. And at that time, it was CubeSats were becoming more ubiquitous, not just at NASA and other space institutions, but in academia as well. And our idea was to incubate missions, CubeSat missions, just like we were incubating like actual large satellite missions as well. And prototyping that was much easier. But what was happening was that scientists and engineers were still using computer-based technology to communicate the insides of the satellite mission or the concept of operations. And so what we did was we just started 3D printing them to be super modular, the mock-ups, and they can bring them to their meetings and take them apart and say, hey, here's the computer part of the satellite. Here are certain disks, and you can take them apart just like a set of cards almost. And that saved a lot of money and time, an engineer's, 10 hours worth of time, right? I think it's the same thing with the large satellite landers that we were creating as well. You can take hours and hours, or even sometimes even weeks, to create a model in a computer, to showcase the scale, to showcase the maneuverment, and then figure out, hey, okay, is this good, or is it, should we design this a different way? When you can just get cardboard and create a lander to scale and be like, look, it's this big, and we're also this big too if we stand next to it. Therefore, it may be too small for a ice, part of Europa. I don't know. And having that, it was so much fun, but in just bringing scientists into our lab just to be able to play with our cardboard prototypes, it was really effective. And then it didn't cost any money. It literally probably took the cardboard out of the trash. I don't even know where we got it.
You say to all of our scientists and engineers right now, just like, yeah, don't feel like you've got to look so smart. Why don't you try it the practical right in front of you way?
So you were able to kind of prove the value of design thinking in this highly technical space. I was going to ask about like how this translates to the way that designers are well positioned and important to sustainability projects. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see in that space?
From my experience working in sustainability, I think throughout my career, I think one of the biggest impacts that design can have as a part of sustainability is really defining what that socioeconomic bubble is. If we look at sustainability, the definition of it, there's many definitions of it. One of the definitions is a Venn diagram, and one bubble is economic, one bubble is environment, and the other bubble is social equity. And I think the industry right now, because of compliance, because of policies, they are moving towards, every company being more accountable for sustainability, right? But I think that it is still almost a checkmark thing, right? Checking off the box of this, and this, meeting our goals of the future. But what starts to happen is that leaves out a bit of the social equity bubble, right? And I think because designers are so strong at understanding human behaviors, creating paradigm shifts, building relationships, inclusion, accessibility, right? Designing for that, like designers in design industry has the opportunity to redefine what that bubble is, to make sustainability a more holistic thing within products, within companies, within institutions, and holding that flag high. And in product design, especially, we have the power to say, hey, no, we're going to start with sustainability principles. We're going to make our product 100% recyclable. We're going to make it repairable. We're going to make it durable enough that it's long lasting. I think, in a lot of ways, we do have the power to suggest and recommend that, and start off with that instead of making sustainability a part of compliance and checking off boxes after we invent, we create, and we innovate. So, yeah, I feel like it's imperative that designers of all kinds jumps on the sustainability boat. That's how we're going to shift left. We call it shift left at Microsoft, where, we take something and we put it at the beginning of the prod dev process, right? The design thinking phase. It wants to be a part of the strategy. Sustainability, equity, accessibility, inclusion needs to be a part of the spec. It needs to be a requirement in everything that we do. And I think how we do that is up to design.
I love how you talk about it, because especially in big companies, for someone, like sustainability might be like what you just described, the checkmark, the percentage of recycled materials in a product, not thinking about like equity and what does this product mean for like social economic impact. Like if it ends up in the landfill, how does it influence people who are like go to those landfills in East Asia and pick up the trash to resell it, or how the price of it and how it's manufactured, like does it limit access to resources for some people, and not like in the global impact, because like it's easy to be American and buy on farmers market and say, hey, I'm organic and sustainable, while the product we're buying are actually polluting the world on the other side of the Pacific and making other societies like miserable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Eventually, we need to get to a place where sustainability is by default. We are working within the boundaries of the planet, and eventually the planet is going to have harder and harder constraints and boundaries. So it's not a, hey, let's do this. It's like, we have to do it. If we're not doing it, we need to start yesterday, because it's only going to get harder and harder to design within these constraints in the future. And so, innovation and culture change, we know that takes a decade, if anything. So being able to start to amplify that impact and amplify the need to bring it into strategic conversations is so important today, for being able to get to where we want to go later, right?
Recently, there was a Apple sustainability ad that was kind of buzzy on the internet, on LinkedIn and such. And I was wondering what you thought of the sort of storytelling of that ad and how that fits into this paradigm that you're talking about, these Venn diagrams and this narrative. Is it responding to that and kind of pushing on those boundaries?
Yeah, I think the story of sustainability, we're going to start to see it in different ways. And I think a lot of companies are going to start to experiment with how they communicate the importance of what they do in sustainability. I think the Apple commercial is that, right? They are trying to figure how are they reaching their users? How are they reaching and connecting with what people want to be connected with, right? And I think there's many different ways we could go about that. Microsoft has their own strategy, right? And it might evolve in the future, as well as Apple's sustainability story strategy may evolve too. I think it needs to be relevant to who they're reaching. But that is, I think, the biggest impact that we can have as creatives all up is how do we start to build in the idea of sustainability into everyone's daily lives so that they understand this interconnections, the system interconnections between recycling this bottle, putting this in the right bin, right? Or choosing organic food to going to sleep at night, to, the food that they put on the table, to, the future of tomorrow, their generations ahead of them. Like it's so abstract right now to some people, it's hard. And I think design and creatives have always had the agency, but also the power to understand how to connect that. I think that's honestly, I might be biased, but I think that's going to be the movement of our time. The more the more ubiquitous AI becomes, the more technology becomes smaller, the more technology becomes robust, et cetera, high performing, whatever it might be, the more we're going to have to preach about sustainability. And it's always going to be this trade-off and this balance. And we need to figure out how to bring sustainability conversation into the bread and butter of what people do in a daily life so that they don't even need to have a choice, that it's not a premium thing, that it's accessible to everyone, that it's a part of going about your daily life is that you have to be sustainable, right? But maybe it's not even called sustainability in the future. Maybe it's just called
living.
Right?
I think, yeah, that you're bringing up this feeling for me, which is that it's frustrating or icky to have sustainability get commodified, to have it be like a selling point or a marketing technique, and yet, of course, we need all businesses to like care about it and incorporate it into their values and direction. How do you feel like you walk that line, especially as a person that does have a leadership role in a business that, cares about being profitable as well as hopefully legitimately cares about sustainability?
Absolutely. Well, starting with financially, sustainability, good sustainable design inherently wants to be cost effective. Mm-hmm. It wants to be able to save money. I think supply chain, shortening the life cycle of a product is hopefully saving companies money and supply chains money. And we know companies really love that. We know that they love saving money. So communicating that is important. Figuring out how that connects back to a user journey is important. What does a user need to do, whether it's a consumer or whether it's an enterprise customer, commercial, whatever type of user you have in your company, connecting that to the user journey is important. Right now, a life cycle, when we think about the life cycle of a product, or when you think of sustainability, you might hear of LCA, that's a life cycle analysis. Currently, those things do not connect to what we know as a user journey, right? From a scenario or a moment in time of how someone uses a product or experience or app. Being able to communicate how those two things connect is really important, because that's how designers can drive more sustainable behavior so that they will invest in sustainable products, right? So that they will continue and keep your product. If extending the life is a principle of sustainability, it's, a very general principle. How does a user go through their journey, their daily lives using the product, but want to even extend the life of their product, keep their product, cherish their product, right? Instead of disposing it. You can have the most sustainable product with most sustainable material ever, but unless a user puts it in the right bin, it just goes in the trash, right? Or like, unless somebody composts something in an actual compost bin, it's just going to go into the landfill. So we need to start connecting those dots. And I think until the industry does understand that, it's going to be hard to figure out exactly what the holistic value prop of sustainability is.
So we've talked a little bit about the external facing sustainability messaging to consumers, and also the internal process changes that designers can do to make stuff more sustainable. What's the mix of your role as a sustainability director? Are you doing both of those things in equal measure? What does your work at Microsoft look like?
Also, to add on to the question, you also work with the devices team, so industrial design, making more products to the world full of products. Probably something that keeps every industrial design at night sometimes. What's your point of view on that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, right. I mean, it goes to say that the more things we create in the world, even if they're sustainable, are more things in the world, right? And that is, I think, a huge movement of industrial design time, is this big question. It's an ethical question almost. And I hear you on that, Margaret. What my role is, and it's still developing, to be quite honest, at Microsoft, is more of a T-shaped role, working with product teams, Windows, Xbox, mixed reality, Surface, partnering with Azure, cloud, AI teams, M365, to really build a cohesive end-to-end understanding of what sustainability is and how that can impact our products and how that it can impact a user. Kind of going back to what we were talking about, that socioeconomic bubble, right? Mm. In order to figure out how to do that, connecting the dots, understanding the in-betweens are important. And that typically doesn't happen when we talk about human-centered design, or we think about the human. We think about designing for one human in their space and their environment. But when we think about sustainability, we need to, going back to thinking about systems, right? We're designing for relationships. We're designing for what's in between A and B. We're designing a process. We're designing a practice. We are designing energy flow, right? Or for emotion. And so I think thinking in that way, is a paradigm shift for sustainability, and something that I would love to bring to Microsoft, so we can figure out how it's inherent in everything that we do.
When we were first getting introduced to you, you had mentioned that designers solving sustainability issues need to understand a relationship between macro and micro and systems. And I think you were kind of getting to that. But for our benefit and the listeners, can you talk a little bit more about what that means, and maybe even give us an example?
The macro and micro story is also me trying to figure out what's my purpose in design in general. How has my path from all the things that I did, prior to NASA JPL to, to Microsoft, to sustainability. I always try to find these patterns and try to make sense of a journey, which is part of, the practice and what I do in design in general. So that theme has really been macro to micro, right? Been designing for the universe, essentially, right? Designing for space, and then designing for things on Earth. Through my personal life, for the past couple of years, I've been going on a little bit of a health journey and really understanding how important inner space is, right? We have outer space, but inner space is so important. And it just makes me think how important it is to understand relationships and interconnections. So, for example, how can we start to design thinking in systems, right? Designing not just for having empathy for the user, but having empathy for the in-between, having empathy between A and B, whether A is a product and B is another product, or A is a person, B is a product, or we're designing for privacy, we're designing for happiness, we're designing for more efficient processes. What does that look like? Because some of that is intangible, and it's really hard to design for something that is invisible. It's also hard to quantify something that's invisible. So it's begins to move into the area of service design, I think. Right. We talk about service design. We are creating for something that's kind of invisible. It's the in-betweens, but it's that relationship that I think is really important. And if you talk about space and technology, right? Like the question is, people might ask is why should I care about the planets, about Earth, about the solar system? Yet they look at the moon every night, right? They also see the sun every day. Hopefully they, walk on Earth, right? They see the stars. The time itself is based off of planets and the sun and the moon. It's so built into our life, yet people don't understand those interconnections. And these kind of things are not typically something that you look for in like traditional user research. And so how do those types of holistic parameters help to influence us to create more holistic solutions? Is kind of where I'm getting at.
I feel like it makes sense that you are so good at that, because at NASA, nothing can be overlooked, right? Like everything about the environment, everything about the interaction with the other humans that might be there, like it's all accounted for. So that's amazing that you now get to apply that to other products or other ways of thinking. Do you have maybe advice for some of the specific questions that you would inject into any scenario that would help somebody start to think about how the person using the thing could create community, or really the type of thinking you're talking about? How do we encourage the designers that listen to this to start involving that layer?
I think it starts with just understanding, considering your environment, considering the inputs and outputs of where your materials come from, how a user is going to use it and dispose of your product. That needs to be a part of that story. And with thinking about sustainability in the beginning, in the front end process, even at the discussion guide phase, will inherently allow people to design systemically from an ecosystem point of view, right? We can create an ecosystem of products by thinking about the ecosystem of the earth. We can definitely do that. That is totally possible. And we just need to figure out how to do that.
What do you guys think? Or should we get to wrapping?
I have more questions. Like, did you learn about aliens while in NASA?
I have to say that whenever aliens were brought up, no one would really talk about it. There was a lab, though, I will say, a building at JPL called the Extraterrestrial Materials Lab. It's not what people think offhand when they think of extraterrestrial. It really just means bringing in soil and dirt and rocks from somewhere maybe in Utah or some place that looks like the moon, and placing these rocks and these materials essentially to the areas of campus, the areas of lab that we test these robots on. So it was creating extraterrestrial, quote unquote, materials to test our terrestrial robots on. Although I just found that the name of the lab was so funny. I was like,
You're like, you guys are trying to create conspiracy theories on this campus right now. I don't know. I think that they made that building sound a little too boring. Sure, it's just some dirt in there. I'm kidding. It seems super legitimate. But that's a fun question, Margaret.
Well, now we are very much like UFO is on the radar, right? Like, I don't know if government doesn't have anything better to do, but apparently they have time for some hearing and testimonies. Okay.
Yeah, whatever department is putting that out, they might need a marketing manager.
Yeah.
Hire some design thinking there. Who knows?
Yeah, let's wrap up with our last couple questions. Margaret, do you want to take it away?
Yeah. For someone with such extraterrestrial experience, it will be a fun one. But what is your favorite color?
Oh, people always make fun of me for this answer because I say it's black. Not because I'm a designer, but I think it's because I was always playing with that black Crayola marker when I was a kid. When you paint the black Crayola marker on like a coffee filter or a napkin and you put water to it, it bleeds color. Have you ever tried that?
No, that sounds
I
cool.
don't know it. Wow. How does it work?
That sounds like a cool Illustrator trick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A little science experiment for us all to do in our house. Neat. Okay, so it's black, but only because black becomes rainbow when it's in this context. Or that's how it started?
I think so. And I think it's just from going to design school. I used to always get made fun of at NASA too, of all of us would just wear black all the time. And we kind of became the team that just wear all black. I don't know. It's a thing, isn't it?
What do the other people were wearing? That logo t-shirts?
There was a
Oh,
lot of Hawaiian shirts at JPL.
oh my gosh, my like favorite. Oh gosh, this engineer I work with at my last job, who I like love so much, is so obsessed with tropical things and like all Hawaiian print, tiki, everything. It's very funny to me. So that's on brand.
hmm
Oh, I love it. Well, Jessie, another question that we really always love to ask people that we have on the show is a moment that we really are hoping you can celebrate yourself, your achievements, and everything so special about you. And it's, what is the thing that you bring to the table that's uniquely yours and a reason that we really need you here doing this work?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I'm not one to immediately know and talk about my strengths. I think that maybe that is one of my strengths. I don't know, to empower others. That's what really drives me, is seeing how I can help to open up a channel, pave a path, and empower and inspire others to then create change. That has been one of the most rewarding things and it's almost making me emotional right now. One of the most rewarding things about looking back on my career, that some people just don't know that they can move into science, go, work at NASA, work what to do for sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. It's planting a seed that I love. I love to plant seeds, like figuratively and literally. But that has been the most special part, and the most rewarding of my career, being able to help pave paths and inspire people to make change.
Wow. Do you want to share an example or a story that comes to mind about that?
Well, at JPL at NASA, there's, gosh, I don't know. There's multiple teams of designers at JPL right now, in many different aspects. And seeing how they work with engineers, how engineers are absorbing, accepting, and driving design thinking is amazing. Knowing that NASA headquarters also created a art director role I never thought that would happen. That wasn't something that could happen, that was allowed to happen when I was at JPL. Just tells me that this is just the beginning, for design at NASA. And it's only going to get more and more incredible, as the years come. And I think we're there, right, with sustainability. And then in the industry too, really just being able to ask a question and implanting yourself at a place that's like kind of uncomfortable is, so not necessarily something I'm good at. I don't think I'm good at it, but I'll do it. I'll do it because I know it's going to make some kind of change and have some sort of impact. And then, fail fast and fail often. That's what I've had to also learn and be strong at, and not be perfect at what I do, and know that in order to climb that mountain, you're going to have to make a lot of mistakes. And I've gotten to a point where I'm a Virgo, so I don't necessarily love making mistakes, but it's helped me as a person grow and achieve what I've been able to achieve.
Yeah, well, we're really grateful for your resilience and, just like commitment to these spaces. You clearly are making a really big impact. So thank you for all your hard work. And thank you for coming to talk to us today. It's been really nice. If people want to follow along with the work you're doing or communicate with you, is that okay? And what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach me on Instagram. It's at Jessie Kawata. I was going to say .com, but there's no .com after it. Proves to show how old I am when I'm. But yeah, definitely reach out to me there. Yeah, it's come say hi and let's nerd out on space and Earth.
Yeah. One thing I should probably talk about, and it didn't come up before, all the Mercury retrogrades and other retrogrades we had this year. There was a lot of it. I was blaming projects not be on time because of that.
We should collaborate on this cosmic design practice, Margaret.
I love all the people making fun of it, being like Mercury in the microwave or whatever. It's a great little spin of the internet. All right. Well, and everybody, as always, you can find our Instagram is WID_Seattle. And our lovely website is beyondraypodcast.com. The website, again, is where you can always find show notes and more of the links and things that come up in the episode. So do check that out.
And show notes are fun, and we put pictures there. So.
Yeah, they are. Margaret kills it on that, so don't miss her hard work. Okay, well, it's been really nice chatting with everybody today. Jessie, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Good luck with everything, and thank you for having me.